You ever look at the world and notice something that just doesn't quite add up? Well, here's a big one. Why are so many of the world's richest oil-producing countries not democracies? It's this incredible political mystery, a real head-scratcher that kind of goes against everything we think we know about money and power. So let's dig in and see if we can solve this puzzle together. So here's the core of it. The general rule of thumb we're all taught is that when a country gets richer, it gets more democratic. More money, more freedom, that whole thing. But then you look at the map and you see all of these super wealthy oil states that are just a massive exception to that rule. What is going on there? And this isn't just a random pattern. It's a huge crack in a really important theory of political science. The idea that economic development leads to democracy is a big one, but oil seems to be the giant exception, and that's exactly what we're going to investigate today. Okay, so check this out. Here's the paradox in a nutshell. On one side, you've got the path we expect. A country builds up all sorts of different industries, it has to tax its people, and those people, in turn, demand a say in how their money gets spent. No taxation without representation. Simple enough. But then, there's the oil state path. The government gets its cash straight from the ground, not from the people. And that breaks that super important link between paying taxes and demanding a voice. To figure out if oil itself is really the bad guy here, a political scientist named Michael Ross put together this huge study to try and isolate its effects. You can really think of it like a massive investigation, putting oil and other natural resources on trial to see if they're actually guilty of holding back democracy. And when I say massive, I mean it. The investigation pulled in data from 113 different countries all over the globe. And it stretched across 27 years of history, from 1971 all the way to 1997. That let the researchers spot trends over decades, not just snapshots in time. And all of that incredible work, all that data was focused on answering just one single crucial question. Does relying on oil and minerals actually hurt a country's chances of becoming a democracy? And just so we're clear on what we're talking about, the study looked at places where oil is a gigantic piece of the economic pie. I mean, look at this. For countries like Brunei, Kuwait, Nigeria, and Angola, oil exports made up nearly half of their entire economy at certain points. That is the kind of intense, overwhelming reliance we're looking at here. So after all of that, after crunching decades of data and making sure to control for all sorts of other things like how rich a country was to begin with, or its religion, or what part of the world it was in, the study came to a really clear, statistically significant conclusion. The jury is in. And the answer is a resounding yes. A state's dependency on oil, or other mineral exports for that matter, is statistically tied to having a less democratic government. This isn't just an idea, it's a finding that holds up under serious scrutiny. But believe it or not, the story gets even weirder when you look at the details. So get this, because it's pretty counterintuitive. You would think that oil does the most damage in countries that are already just swimming in it, right? But the data actually shows the opposite. The first barrel does the most harm. A new oil discovery has its biggest negative punch in countries that are just starting to rely on it. This is a huge deal. It suggests that even a small resource discovery can push a country down a really dangerous political path. And here's the second big twist. The anti-democratic effect is way, way worse in poor countries. If a wealthy, stable country like Norway finds a massive oil field, it doesn't really budge the needle on their democracy. But that exact same discovery in a poorer nation, it can have a devastatingly negative impact. It's a pretty clear sign that strong institutions in developed countries act like a shield against this political curse. Okay, so the verdict's in. Oil is guilty. But how does it do it? What's the murder weapon? Well, the investigation identified 3 prime suspects, 3 main ways that oil wealth seems to poison the democratic process. First up is what's called the rentier effect. The easiest way to think about it is like a trust fund government. Because the state is getting filthy rich from oil, it doesn't need to tax its people. In fact, it can afford to be super generous. Lots of public sector jobs, subsidies, you name it. And that combination of low taxes and high spending basically buys off the population and quiets down any demands for real political accountability. The second suspect is a lot more direct, the repression effect. It is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. All that oil money can pay for a much bigger military, a stronger police force, and a more effective internal security state. That wealth gives authoritarian regimes the power, the muscle, to silence dissent and just crush any popular movements pushing for democracy. And the third suspect is a little more subtle. It's called the modernization effect, and it's all about social change. See, normally, when an economy grows, it creates this educated, specialized urban workforce. And those are the people who tend to organize and demand more political rights. But oil wealth, it bypasses all that. It just pumps money into the system without creating the complex social fabric that usually underpins democracy. It's wealth without the modernization. So this whole phenomenon, this strange and troubling link between natural resources and authoritarianism, it's actually part of a much bigger pattern that economists call the resource curse. And it's a true paradox, where a country's greatest natural treasure ends up doing way more harm than good. The resource curse is really a triple threat. Study after study has shown that countries rich in natural resources often end up with slower economic growth. They face a much higher risk of breaking out into civil war, and, as this study powerfully confirms, they tend to have less democratic governments. It's a really, really nasty combination. And what's really terrifying is that these three things can lock a country into a vicious cycle, what people call a resource trap. The authoritarian rule leads to bad economic decisions and slower growth. That stagnant economy and a government that isn't accountable to anyone make conflict more likely. And of course, that conflict destroys the economy and helps entrench the authoritarians even more. It is an incredibly difficult trap to escape.
You know, the author of this study, Michael Ross, he summed it up perfectly. He said that for a handful of countries, this wealth has been a blessing. But for most, it's been like the curse of King Midas. The very thing they thought would make them powerful and rich turns out to be a tragic and unexpected source of grief.
So we end up right back where we started, but now with a much clearer and, honestly, a much sadder picture. The evidence is pretty strong that, yes, a country's greatest natural blessing can also be its deepest political curse. It's just a powerful reminder that the road to prosperity and freedom is a lot more complicated than just striking it rich.